Well, welcome to the Ministry of Grace study on the book of Revelation. We are in chapter 8 this week. So if you have your notes or if you have your book with you, then let's turn to chapter 8. Remember last time we talked about the 144,000 witnesses that were 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And you don't remember that because you weren't here. The week before that, we talked about the first 6 seal judgments. Remember, he opened the seals, and the rider on the white horse, and the rider on the red horse, and the rider on the black horse, and the rider on the pale horse. Chloros. Yeah. Yeah. You were here for that one, I believe. Okay. All right. Yep. Okay. So, this week we will look at the 7th seal judgment, which appears to include all of the other judgments. And then we'll get into the first 4 of the trumpet judgments. Now, there are 7 trumpet judgments, just like there are 7 seal judgments. And there are 7 bowl or vial judgments. The trumpet and the vial judgments are very similar. So some people have erroneously concluded from that they happen at the same time. But that's not how it occurs. The 7 trumpet judgments happen one right after the other throughout most of the second half of the tribulation. And then the 7 bowl or vial judgments will happen very fast, rapid fire right at the end of the tribulation. Okay, so that's one of the things that tells us that they're not talking about the same event. Okay, so let's start with verse 1. When the Lamb opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Now that doesn't sound like a judgment, does it? And yet, what did we hear in heaven just before that? Throughout the first 7 seal judgments and the introduction of the king on the throne. Well, in Revelation 4:5, we had sounds and peals of thunder coming from the throne. In Revelation 4:8 through 11, we had praise from the elders when the 4 living ones proclaimed the threefold holiness of God. Then in Revelation 5, 9, and 10, singing of the elders of the worthiness of the Lamb to open the scroll. Then the loud voices of the elders, the 4 living ones, and many angels praising the worthiness of the Lamb with a loud noise. Then a thunderous voice of the first living one as he opened the first seal. Martyrs under the altar crying with a loud voice in Revelation 6, 9. The sealing angel rising from the east who cried out with a loud voice. And then in Revelation 7, 9, and 10, the great multitude crying out with a loud voice proclaiming salvation to our God and to the Lamb. Suddenly, with the opening of the 7th seal, the calm before the storm. Yeah, very, very well put. That happened just before the seals were opened, yes. Or just before one of them was open, which was no, it wasn't before the rapture. It was the 4 angels, yes, holding back the 4 winds and the 4 quadrants of the earth. Yes. Right? Okay. So those are apparently still being held back. Or again? No. Still. Okay. And now we have silence in heaven. So there's silence in heaven and stillness on the earth. How eerie. And as you said, the calm before the storm. Half an hour. This is translated from the Greek word hemiorion. Do you, anybody know what Dodge's famous engine is all about? It's called a Hemi. And what does that mean? Do you know? The top of the piston, of the cylinder is a hemisphere shape instead of flat, and it apparently burns the fuel more efficiently with more power, etc. Okay, hemi basically means half, so it's a hemisphere. It's a half a sphere at the top there. Okay, so Orion is the word for hour, so it literally means half an hour. Now, is that a literal half an hour? We don't know. But I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be a literal half an hour. Remember, though, that time in heaven is different than time on earth. Now, in reading the first prophecy of Zephaniah, it's easy to see a description of the silence and the trumpet judgments that follow. Notice two of these verses especially. The first is the description of the silence in heaven, and this is probably not in your book. You'll have the full description of the prophecy of Zephaniah. But I'm just going to look at two verses. Zephaniah 1:7, which says, "Be silent before the Lord God, for the day of the Lord is near. The Lord has prepared a sacrifice and consecrated his guests." So it says, be silent, and that's what we're experiencing, is a silence in heaven. Then the second Zephaniah verse we want to look at is Zephaniah 1:16, which says, and it's describing the day of the Lord, "A day of trumpet blasts and battle cry against the fortified city and against the lofty battlements." So Zephaniah is talking about the day of the Lord. And the day of the Lord begins with the second half of the tribulation. So this silence is early part of the day of the Lord, and then the trumpet blasts are going to come. Verse 2, "Then I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them." These are 7 angels that say, stand before God. The word stand is verse estekasin, which is a perfect tense of the word to stand. Now, we've talked about the Greek perfect tense before. It's an action that occurred at a point in time in the past, but it has an ongoing effect. And the focus of the perfect tense is on the effect. Okay? And you remember from earlier when in the study, we talked about a perfect tense. It comes from the Latin word perfectere, which means to finish. All right? So it doesn't mean it's without a flaw. It means it's completely finished. Okay, so it says the 7 angels who stand before God. So at some point in time in the past, they stood before God. And the effect is that they are now standing before God constantly. Okay? We talked about another example of this perfect tense in the expression, "He is risen." "He is risen" is the perfect tense of the word to rise. He rose from the grave, and as a result, the effect is that he is risen from the dead. And that's where the emphasis is. The emphasis on this is that they are now standing before God. Okay? So there's something very special about these angels. And the word before is enopion, which literally means in the eyes of or in the face of. So these are standing probably directly before the throne. Back in Luke 1:19, if you read through the Christmas story in Luke's gospel, you'll come across this where it says, and this is the angel who is appearing to Zacharias. Zacharias was Elizabeth's husband. Remember, Elizabeth was Mary's cousin. She was the mother of John the Baptist. Okay, and this is when the angel came to Zacharias to tell him what was going to happen. Yes, he could not speak. Yep. "And the angel answered him, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I was sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. So we know at least one of these 7 presence angels is the angel Gabriel.
Are there only 7 present angels? So that's why we know that one has to be him?
We know one has to be him because he says, I stand in the presence of God. Oh, and you're saying, why does he have to be one of these 7?
It could be, I mean, there's
Um,
a lot of angels that stand in the presence of God, but at the point that they're talking about in Revelation, it's only 7.
but it says, I saw the 7 angels which stand before God, who stand before God. So, yes, he's one of these 7 angels.
Okay, that makes sense.
Verse 3, and another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer. Now, some people think that this is the angel of the Lord, Jesus Christ himself. There's 2 reasons why that can't be. First of all, Jesus is the Lamb, and he's already in the throne room, so he can't be this other angel. Another reason, and one that's more specific, is that it says, an other angel. And this word is the Greek word allos, which means another of the same kind. The Greek word allos means another of the same kind. There is another Greek word that means another, and that's heteros, another of a different kind. In fact, we refer to the sexual act between a man and a woman as heterosexual. Hetero meaning another of a different kind. Okay? But this one is allos, meaning another of the same kind. Therefore, it is another angel of the same kind that we had just been talking about. And there's one more reason why we know this isn't Jesus, is every time in the book of Revelation that Jesus is spoken of, he is specifically identified. And you have here in your notes a number of them. The faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead, the ruler of the kings of the earth, the Son of Man, the first and the last, the living one, etc. Okay. So if this had been Christ, then he would have to be identified. Now, he had a golden, this angel, this other angel, another angel, had a golden censer in his hand. What's a censer? He's the guy on TV that controls the bleep button and censors anything that, different kind of sensor. A censer is a shallow bowl that is suspended by 3 or 4 gold chains, and typically they put hot coals in there and then put incense on top of that so that it burns the incense. The incense that they burn typically is frankincense. And in fact, the word censer here is literally a frankincenser. Okay? Now, this angel came and stood at the altar. In the temple in the Old Testament, there were 2 altars. There was the bronze altar that had steps leading up to it, that had a fire on it where the sacrifices were burned. The daily, the yearly, the whatever. That was outside the holy place. That was in the courtyard of the priests. From there they go inside the holy place where there is the showbread and the lampstand and the incense altar. Now this is a lower altar. It's about 2 cubits, which would be about 36 inches high. It has a border around it, and it has fire on it. It's overlaid with gold, and they put the incense on there. In fact, Zacharias, when Gabriel came and talked to him, his job that day was to burn the incense on the altar of incense. So there's another tie-in. In heaven, there's no bronze altar. Why? because Christ has offered a sacrifice that is good for all time, right? So they don't need to sacrifice animals anymore. So there's no bronze altar. The only altar left would be the golden altar. And again, it's a solid object, not with legs, but it's solid, and it's the one underneath where they saw the martyrs. Okay, so this angel, one of the seven presents, or not one of the seven presents, another angel of the same kind has come with the censer, and in verse 5 he says, "Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar." You notice he doesn't put incense on it here. "And threw it to the earth. And there were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. Now the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared to blow them." Those are the seven presence angels with the seven trumpets, right? So this angel has come to the incense altar, taken some of the fire, the coals from the incense altar, and then he throws it to the earth. Verse 7. "The first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth. And a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and a third of the grass was burned up." I'm sorry, and all green grass was burned up. You're right. This angel has thrown the coals towards the earth. Suddenly, the perspective changes to that of the earth. Okay? We're not in heaven anymore. We're looking from earth. "And there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth." Now, what in the world are these? Symbolically, it's the coals that have been thrown from heaven. It is some kind of cosmic action that is causing fire and hail mixed with blood to come upon the earth. Now, I am not one who believes that we have to explain all of the miracles in the Bible with normal events that we would see on the earth. However, there may be an explanation for this. Comets are made up of a mass of parts that are kind of held together by gravity, and there's a lot of methane, frozen methane. There's a lot of typically carbon, typically iron, and other elements. If a comet were to make a close pass to the Earth, and we were to pass through its tail, it's entirely possible that pieces of it would rain down on the Earth. The methane would melt and be ignited from the heat coming into the atmosphere, which would cause hail and fire. And if there was a lot of iron present, it would appear like blood. So it could be that. I read a book fairly recently called The Comets of God. And the author believed that all of the events in the Revelation are from comets. I think that's going a little overboard. That's sort of like if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Okay. So, now we see the hail and fire mixed with blood, and it says the trees are burned up and all green grass. Well, that word translated green is chloros. Remember that? Where did we see that? The pale horse. And what did we say that color was at the time? It actually is, and I mentioned that in the notes, and sometimes it's the color of fresh grass. More often it's the color of dying grass. It's also, there have been some texts during that period of time written in Greek that refer to the color of honey.
That's right.
Okay? And that's the same word, chloros. So, all the chloros grass is burned up. Now, we will encounter later that a third of or a fourth, I don't remember, of the grass is burned up. Well, if all of the grass is burned up here, how do we have grass later? Well, there's a couple ways we can do that. One is grass grows fairly quickly. And the second one is if this was the dying or dead grass and the green grass did not burn, then there would still be grass later. I don't know what it is. So that was the first trumpet. This hail and fire mixed with blood. Verse 8 and 9. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Something like a great mountain burning with fire. It could be, it could be another comet, and I think it very likely is a large portion of this comet that's coming in now, because it would appear like a huge mountain. Okay. Do you know the difference between a meteor and a meteorite? That's what one would think, yes, but that's not the difference. A meteor is an object that burns up in the atmosphere. A meteorite is one that makes it all the way to the surface of the earth. Now, I would have always thought it was just the opposite, but that's what it is, okay? It's possible that this was a meteorite, a huge meteorite that was coming in. But it says it was burning with fire, and a third of the sea became blood. Now, some have speculated that that was because of all the animals in the sea that were killed. Well, the problem is, if you take all of the animals in all of the oceans and put them all together, they would form just a minuscule portion of the ocean. So all of their blood wouldn't turn the ocean red. I think it's more likely that, again, this is part of a comet, and it's the iron content of it that has caused the sea to turn red. It doesn't have to be. It could just be that God has created something that turned the sea to blood. Well, if you read the comments of God, he believes that that was cometary activity also during the but I don't know. If it was a large chunk of a comet, like a mountain, when it came and impacted the ocean, the shock wave created by that impact within the water would have been so strong it would have killed anything for maybe hundreds or even thousands of miles.
A third of it.
It says a third of the living creatures in the seas died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. If it were this huge piece of a comet or any other heavenly body that impacted the ocean, it would cause one heck of a tsunami. Therefore, any of the ships that were along the shore would probably be destroyed, but the ones who were out at sea would be okay.
Also,
Okay, that's 2 trumpet judgments. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on the third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the waters because it had been made bitter. Well, let's start with the latter part of that first. The word wormwood is a translation of the Greek word absinthos. Absinthe is made from the wormwood plant. Absinthe is a licorice flavor. It is highly alcoholic, and in fact, if you drink too much of it, it'll kill you. Okay, so this now has been made bitter from the wormwood. It says here, a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch. Well, that word torch is a Greek word lampos. It's used to describe an outdoor lamp, if you will, a torch, which frequently has flames breaking off of it as you go along. It's different than the word for lantern, which is what would be on the inside of a dwelling place. So here again, it's possible that it was another part of the comet. And as I said before, comets are a whole bunch of aggregates that are compacted together. And it's not uncommon for comets to break up. I apologize. We had a little bit of trouble with our video camera, so we lost part of the previous session. So I'm going to pick it up from here. We were talking about the possibility of a comet being the one that contained the wormwood, and it's very common for comets, if they get too close to other large bodies, to actually break up. In fact, a number of years ago, the comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 got too close to Jupiter and ended up breaking up and impacting Jupiter, I don't know, 12, 14, 15 pieces that impacted all in a row. So that is a possibility for this. Now it says that it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. That expression, springs of water, really refers to the sources of water. Now today we know that a lot of the rivers are fed by snowpack and by glacial melt. So it's very possible that when this comet broke up, the pieces fell all over, including all over the mountains, and it would be very hot when it came in, so that it would melt a lot of snow and produce a lot of water. Verse 12, and the fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light might be darkened, and a third of the day might be kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night. Now this is a very perplexing section, and it's not at all clear what it's saying, but I think I understand a couple of things about it. First of all, the word struck is the Greek word pleso, which is where we get the English word plague from, but it really means to strike something. It means to effect it or to cause damage to it. It says that a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light might be darkened. Now it's possible, if this was a comet and we had passed through the tail of the comet, that there would be a lot of particulates in the atmosphere that would darken any light shining through the atmosphere. We saw a similar thing here in Oregon over the summer when we had those terrible wildfires that caused the whole sky to turn dark and the sun barely shone through. It was kind of an eerie situation. So it says that a third of their light might be darkened. So that's probably what happened there. But then it says, and a third of the day might be kept from shining. Well, some have said, well, maybe that was just because of the particulates in the sky, that it got dark a lot earlier and didn't get light as soon in the morning. The problem is that it says a third of the day might be kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night. So it appears that the daytime and the nighttime were both shortened by 1/3. That means instead of a 24-hour day, it would have been a 16-hour day. Now, how could this happen? It's possible that if this heavenly object and the objects that struck the earth hit along the equator in the direction of the rotation of the earth, it could increase the rotation of the earth. If that was the case, it could shorten the day from 24 hours to 16. But another interesting thing about that is what we learn in Matthew 24 when talking about the tribulation. In Matthew 24 it says, "For then there shall be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. In those days, and if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short." And that expression, cut short, means to be shortened. So again, it's possible that during this time the Earth's rotation will speed up and the day will actually become shorter. Verse 13. "Then I looked, and I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice as it flew directly overhead, 'Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth at the blasts of the other trumpets that the three angels are about to blow.'" Now, some translations say eagle, and other translations say angel. There are two different Greek words. The word for eagle is atu, and the word for angel is angelou. We don't know which is the proper translation because they're fairly evenly spread among those copies that are extant today. But whether it's an eagle or an angel, what he's proclaiming is three woes regarding the three trumpets that are yet to sound. Those three trumpets, they will be the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh trumpet judgments. They will be so terrible that they're being proclaimed as woes. And it says, "Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth." We've talked about these people before. These are what I've referred to as the permanent earth dwellers. And here's part of the reason for that. In the Greek here, the dwellers, katoi kusin, means those who live in a permanent residence manner. Not somebody who's visiting, not somebody who's living someplace temporarily, but a permanent dweller. And then it says, epetes geis, which means upon the ground or upon the earth. So these are the people who are permanent earth dwellers. Now, we Christians are not permanent earth dwellers. In fact, there's a song that says, "This earth is not my home, I'm just a passing through." We are citizens of heaven. And when the rapture comes, we will be taken off the earth and go to heaven. When earth dwellers die, they don't go to paradise, they go to Sheol, as we'll learn in our study on hell next week. Sheol is in the heart of the earth, and they will remain there until the great white throne judgment. And after the great white throne judgment, they will be cast into the lake of fire, which is the second death. So these people really are permanent earth dwellers. They will be on the earth and part of the earth until the earth is destroyed right before the great white throne judgment. Now these woes, again, will come from the last three trumpets that are being blown. And they will produce some awful effects. And the people on earth will be tormented from these three blasts of the trumpets. Now we'll get into that a little more in a couple of weeks. Next week, as I said, we'll be going over our lesson on hell so we can understand a little bit better about where the earth dwellers go and where Christians go and where Old Testament saints went when they died. So stay tuned for the next lesson on hell. We're glad you joined us. Sorry for the hiccup this evening. We will hopefully get this resolved and be ready to take off next week. Thank you. Have a good evening.